Vision is a complicated process that requires numerous components of the human eye and brain that work together. The initial step of the fascinating and powerful sense is carried out in the retina of the eye. The eyes are wonderful sensory organs. They help people learn about the world in which they live. Eyes see all sorts of things, big or small, near or far, smooth or textured, colors and dimensions. The eye has often been compared to camera. It would be more appropriate to compare it to a TV camera attached to an automatically tracking tripod, a machine that is self-focusing, adjusts automatically for light intensity, has a self-cleaning lens and feeds into a computer with parallel processing capabilities so advanced that engineers are only just starting to consider similar strategies for the hardware they design. The gigantic job of taking the light that falls on the two retinas and translating into a meaningful visual scene is often curiously ignored, as though all we needed is, in order to see, was an image of the external world perfectly focused on the retina. Although obtaining focused images is no mean task, it is modest compared with the work of the nervous system, the retina plus the brain. As we shall see in this chapter, the contribution of the retina itself is impressive. By translating light into nerve signals, it begins the job of extracting from the environment what is useful and ignoring what is redundant. No human inventions, including computer, is assisted by cameras, can begin to rival the eye. Each eyeball, about 2.5 centimeters in diameter, is lodged within the socket called orbit. Between the orbit wall and the eyeball, there are several structures, namely the voluntary muscles, fat, connective tissue, and lacrimal glands. All these structures are separated from the eyeball and a fascia called Buck's fascia. The voluntary muscles are concerned with the movement of the eyeball. The lacrimal glands produce fluid called tears. The functions of tears are to maintain optical properties of the eye, to wash away so many irritants which may fall on the eye, to act as the disinfectant it contains lysomine, to express emotions. Three coats of the eyeball are the outer coat consisting the sclera, the cornea, the middle coat called the uvea or vascular coat, inner coat called the retina. Sclera forms the outermost wall of the eyeball. Is the white of the eyeball is composed of dense, imperfectly elastic supporting membrane. It helps to maintain the shape of the eye and supports the delicate structure within the eye. Conjunctiva is thin, clear mucous membrane which covers the front of sclera and is reflected from its surface on the lids. It covers the interior surface of the lids and joins them into the eyeball. Cornea is the anterior part of the elastic supporting membrane of the globe which is transparent and clear. It is set into the sclera like a watch glass so that the latter overlaps the cornea all around the periphery. It keeps moist by a layer of tear film anteriorly and bathed on a posterior surface by aqueous humor. It passes light to pass through and helps focusing it on the retina along with the lens. Lining the inner aspect of the sclera is a highly vascular middle layer of the eyeball. The uveal tract concerned chiefly in the nutrition of the eye. It consists of three parts: an anterior post part, the iris, the intermediate part, the ciliary body, the posterior most part, the choroid, which accounts almost two-thirds of the middle coat. Iris is a black disc beneath the cornea. The posterior surface of the iris is pigmented. The color of the iris decides the color of the eye. The muscles of the iris make the pupil larger or smaller. Pupil is the black hole in the center of the iris. The pupils look black due to the darkness of the interior of the eye. It controls the amount of light entering the eye in a bright light. The circular muscles of the iris contract and the pupils become smaller to reduce the amount of light that enters the eye. In the dark, the dilator muscles help the pupil to widen, allowing more light to enter the eye. The eyeball is not a solid sphere but contains a large interior cavity that is divided into two cavities, anterior and posterior. The anterior cavity has two subdivisions known as the anterior and posterior chambers. The distal ends of the dentaries of the photoreceptor neurons are called rods and cones. Descriptive of their shapes, these nerve endings are concerned in the reception and transformation of the light stimuli into electrical impulses. Macula is the most sensitive part of the retina. The cones and rods differs as to numbers, distribution and function. The cones are most densely concentrated in a specially differentiated spot, fovea centralis, found near the center of the retina. It is surrounded by a small area, the macula lutea or yellow spot. It is used activities like need the vision like reading and writing. It contains the greatest concentration of cones and is, therefore, the point of clearest vision in good light. The cones become less and less dense from the fovea outward. Rods, on the other hand, are absent entirely from the fovea and macula and increase in density towards the periphery of the retina. Optic nerves, the nerve fibers arising from each nerve cell in the retina come out through the eyeball, through the optic nerve, and join the fibers coming from the other eye at the interaction in the skull, called chiasma. It carries impulses to the visual cortex in the brain. In order for vision to occur, an image must be formed on the retina to stimulate its receptors, and the resulting nerve impulses must be conducted to the visual area of the cerebral cortex. Formation of retinal image. Four processes are essential for forming a clear image on the retina: refraction of the light rays, accommodation of the lens, contraction of the pupil, convergence of the eyes. It refers to deflection or bending of the rays. The refraction media of the eye are cornea, aqueous humor, lens, and vitreous humor. The light rays are reflected at the anterior surface of the cornea, at the anterior surface of the lens, the posterior surface of the lens. Refraction in ophthalmology refers to measuring the refractive or light bending power of a person's eyes by various specially designed methods. If, while looking at an object situated at infinity, the gaze be transferred to an object near the hand, some readjustment of the power of the crystalline lens will have to occur, otherwise the image will fall behind the retina. This adjustment of the power of the lens is called accommodation. It requires three changes: increase in the curvature of the lens, constriction of the pupils, and convergence of two eyes. During accommodation, the ciliary muscles contract and this causes relaxation of the supersensory ligament and thus the anterior surface of the lens bulges and its power increases. Through this mechanism, the image focuses near so that it is on the retina. As a part of accommodation mechanism, the circular fiber of the iris contract and that constricts the pupil. This prevents divergent rays from the object from entering the eye through the periphery of the cornea and lens. Such peripheral rays could not be refracted sufficiently to be brought to a focus on the retina and therefore would cause a blurred image. The pupil constricts also in bright light to protect the retina from too intense or too sudden stimulation. Convergence is the movement of two eyeballs inward so that their visual axes come together, converge, and the object is viewed. The nearer the object, the greater the degree of convergence necessary to maintain single vision. The rods are known to contain rhodopsin, visual purple in example, a pigmented compound. It is highly light sensitive so that when light rays strike a rod, its rhodopsin rapidly breaks down. This chemical change initiates impulse conducted by the rod. Then, if the rod is exposed to darkness for a short time, the rhodopsin reforms from the opsin and is ready to function again. For this reason, when we want to see an object clearly in the daytime, we look differently as to focus the image on the fovea, but in dim light or darkness, we see an object better if we look slightly to the side of it, thereby focusing the image nearer the periphery of the retina where rods are more plentiful. The visual pathways consist of optic nerve, optic chiasma, lateral geniculate body of thalamus, optic radiation, and the visual cortex of occipital lobe. Fibers from nasal portion of the retina that conduct impulses from the rods and cones to the visual cortex cross over to the opposite side at optic chiasma. Hence, terminate in lateral geniculate body of opposite side. Thus, each optic tract contains fibers from both the retinas. The result is that some information from each eye as a normal vision system arrives on each side of the brain. There are several movements of the human eye which are essential for various functions of visual perception and optical function. There are slow drift movements in the range of 2 which prevent the retinal image from fading. These statistical movements are uncorrelated between the two eyes. This helps to avoid saturation of the chemical process in the cones. Tremor and microsaccades are highly dynamic movements of the eye, which are still during the active fixation of the object point. These movements are necessary to give an active feedback signal to the eye in order to stabilize the operation. Tremors are more regular oscillations while saccades are statistically distributed with amplitude of approximately 2 to 50. The Vergen's movements are used to relate the relative position of the eyes accurately in order to obtain correct stereoscopic vision. Typically, these movements take 0.2 to 0.8 seconds of time. A regular tracking movement corresponds to a simultaneous rotation of both eyes in order to fix the details of a common object. The brain tries to locate the interesting detail in the fovea. This movement is done with the speed of 30 degrees per second. The cone receptors in the retina have a shape of long conical rods or tapers. The light which falls on these elements is guided towards the end of the cell by total internal reflection. The incidence angle is large. This total internal reflection is perturbed and not all of the rays enter the end of the cell by the absorber reception. Therefore, the cones are less sensitive for larger angles. This means that the rays through the outer zones of the pupil are effectively damped and the pupil seems to be abundant. This is an advantage for the quality of the imaging process since the spherical aberration for large pupil diameters has a lower energy weighting. This is called the Stiles-Crawford effect of the first kind. The Stiles-Crawford effect has almost no influence on the vision for high brightness. In this case, the pupil diameters is small and the outer zones of the pupil do not contribute to the imaging process. There is another observation which is called the Stiles-Crawford effect of the second kind. The color sensitivity is also a function of the incident ray angle on the retina. Green light seems to be shifted to the blue side, yellow light shifts to the red, and the blue shifts to the green if it traverses the pupil in the outer zone. In practical calculations of the performance of the schematic eye models, it is possible to incorporate the influence of the Stiles-Crawford effect in a first approximation by introducing a Gaussian apodization of the form. The quality of the optical system of the human eye can be considered in an objective way in analogy to usual optical systems. On the other hand, it can also be discussed in a subjective way because the sensory influences of the human eye and the imaging processing capabilities of the brain are very large. The quality of the optical system of the eye depends on adaptation and accommodation. The quality of the optical system of the human eye is remarkable, but indicates many defects and problems. However, the human brain has a very powerful image processing capability. The signals produced in the retina are propagated backward through the head along with the optical fiber tract, which is linked via the lateral geniculate nucleus to the visual cortex. The signals from the right side of each eye are propagated to the right side of the brain and those from the left side of each eye to the left side of the brain. The images on the retina are reversed so that the right part of the brain processes and the left part of the visual field and vice versa. From the optic chiasma, the optic fibers terminate in the lateral geniculate bodies. From these, optic radiations extend into the primary areas of the visual cortex. These, in turn, are connected to secondary visual association areas and from there to the general interpretive areas of the brain. The 6 layers of the lateral geniculate nucleus are divided equally between information supplied from each cornea and therefore provide the first stages of stereoscopic vision. The cell arrangements each lateral geniculate nucleus are similar to those of ganglion cells of the retina, but far more are devoted to contrast and movement and fewer to luminosity. Similarly, the paired responses of red, green, and yellow, blue are also found in lateral geniculate nucleus, suggesting that its main function is to carry out further processing of incoming signals. The cells of the visual cortex also have a spatial relationship with the ganglion receptive fields of the eyes. About 50% of them are devoted to the macula, with the fields from the other retinal areas being represented in their correct spatial relationship. The visual association areas of the brain appear to deal with more complex processing of the visual signal. In particular, they appear to handle the processing of complex shapes and arrangements. Some evidence for this has been derived from people with brain damage in these areas, whose ability to identify or recognize shapes has been destroyed or severely impaired. Although the lateral geniculate nucleus appears to concentrate on the contrast at edges and the discrimination of form, the primary visual cortex carries the process of form analysis even further. It appears that the cortex has columns of cells extending through 6 layers and particular directions. Some of these arrangements appear to be devoted to recognizing lines or bars or particular lengths and at particular orientations. The following diagram shows the general structure of the visual system. The overall impression gained of how the brain processes visual information is as series of steps, each taking the output of the previous steps and building up progressively more complex and abstract impressions of the input. One of the consequences of the work of the brain is the existence of optical illusions. Optical illusions. Are your eyes and brain working together? Are you a healthy minded person? Do you really think your reflex is working properly? Are your eyes working perfectly? I guess you will say yes, yes, and yes. Let's see how good your brain and eye coordination is working. Just look at those pictures and they are about to come on the screen. What do you see? How many legs this elephant has? 4, 6, or 8? Look at these lines. Are they straight lines or curves? Concentrate in the middle of the circle. Then bring your eyes close and go back. What do you see now? Stare at these boxes. Do you see the black spots between them? Are you sure that there are some black circles between the squares? Bring your head back and forth. Do you see the colors are changing? What do you see? A face or the word liar? How many wolves do you see? Can you identify these 3 faces here? Concentrate at the center. Move your head back and forth. What do you see? Stare at the center. Now move your head back and forth. What do you see? An optical illusion is characterized by visually perceived images that differ from objective reality. The information gathered by the eye is processed in the brain to give a perception that does not tally with the physical measurement of the stimulus source. There are 3 main types: literal optical illusions that create images that are different from the objects that make them, psychological ones that are the effects on the eyes and the brain of excessive stimulation of specific type like brightness, color, position, tilt, movements, and cognitive illusions, the result of unconscious inferences. Your eyes are complex and sensitive organs. This section discussed about the anatomy or structure of the eye. This understanding of vision and the potential problems associated with it will equip you to teach and deal with the visually impaired children more effectively. Visual information from the retina travels from the eye to the brain via the optic nerve. Because eyes see from slightly different positions, the brain must mix two images it receives to get a complete picture. Thank you.